Happy Sunday. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm here to do the walkthrough for late adulthood and very old age. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And this would be the last recording for week 7. And then I will start working on the week 8 recordings as well as the lesson. So since today is Sunday, week 7, the week 7 overview is posted as your homepage. Here is the walkthrough for the assignments. Early adulthood also has its walkthrough, as does middle adulthood. So what we're going to do today is talk about late adulthood. So when you are done discussing, doing the lesson, 3 demographic changes affecting older adults. So that would be demographics in terms of places where the elderly might live. Physical changes, age-related changes that occur, developmental tasks. We'll talk about Havinghurst and Atchley and Peck's theories, and then nutritional requirements, health promotion activities, which again might help with your health promotion campaign. And then your reading is here. And then this chapter 14 is from another book that I've used to teach in the past that talks about advanced old age. And I think it's a really good, it's got a lot of really good information. And so I think that's a good one to read, which is why I included that. And the lesson, which we will come back to in a second. There's your activity, which was gone over in the overview video, as well as your journal entry, one journal entry for this particular lesson. And there you go. So let us move into 7.3, the lesson for late adulthood. This will take you back to the module. And you've made it to old age. Yay, we're all old. The course learning outcomes, the same lesson outcomes, and the reading again, the activity and journal entry. And then we move into the lesson. As always, we will come back to the PowerPoint at the end. So what is ageism? Ageism, and we've talked about bias in earlier weeks. Ageism is when I tend to think of it as when people don't have respect for the elderly. And so they are biased against the elderly, or the elderly are incompetent or can't do things or provide no value for society. And so these particular articles talk about ageism. This is the Center for Aging Better, and that's how they spell it. And so there is a nice little video there that talks about it. And then they also sort of summarized the video as well. So you have their summary here. And so, you know, I think rethinking age brackets is interesting. People are starting to live a little bit older. And so maybe there needs to be a new older elderly category, you know, not just ending at 85. We have people living in their 80s, 90s, and 100s. You know, youth is idolized. Generally speaking, aging is seen as a decline, but it doesn't have to be a decline. I think of the Golden Girls. I used to watch that when I was growing up, and I'm older than they are in that particular show, which just blows my mind. So they really were middle-aged adults going into, well, let's see, they were in their late 40s and 50s, so getting ready to go into late adulthood. Pro-aging campaign, I think that's a good idea. And old is subjective. You know, you're only as old or young as you feel. And then having role models. So for example, for your assignment for this particular lesson, I have a picture of Betty White. And so she lived to a ripe old age and just was an amazing person. So I think if we look at those people as our role models, I think that's great. It's kind of depressing when you have a lot of people that are dying kind of all in a row right now. If you look into the media and go back, and even in the last month, celebrities that have passed away. Bob Newhart, I think, was one of the latest ones. But they're in their late 80s and 90s, which is amazing. And then that same group of people still had a discussion in the live audience. And so they also highlighted that with the panel session after that. That's a great picture. And right, they're kind of unhappy. They look sort of unhappy, old. Looks like they're probably together. She's got a ring, he has a ring, but they look kind of bored, and kind of like, why are you taking my picture? That's that particular picture. And then you have this particular person, who seems like she's working or volunteering some way. She kind of holds herself, perhaps proudly, like a leader, maybe confident, capable, kind of knows what's what. Again, I did not take these pictures. And so then they one change that each of the panel speakers would like to make. So there's that information there. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting piece for those of you that haven't really thought about ageism, or that older people in our country at least are not necessarily thought well of. And in other countries, the elderly are revered and have special places and are taken care of in the home from the family. So it's a little bit different. Now these statistics are a little bit older, but this is from the Institute on Aging and looking at living longer. So by 2030, and we've been looking at healthy people 2030 because we are in 2024, so that's 6 years away. The last of the baby boomers turned 65. And so the older adults are expected to reach 20% of the population. And then it'll sort of level off after that. But it does say that in California, 4.3 million people are ages 65 and up, which is 11%. They're saying that's an 18% increase since 2000. And then people are living up to 85 and longer. The older adults who are living outside nursing homes, long-term care facilities, nearly 1/3 of them live alone because the partner probably has passed away, or the partner might be in a long-term care facility or hospital or some other place. And so the living arrangements differ by race and ethnicity. The older non-Hispanic white women and Black women are more likely than women of other races to live alone. And the percent of older Asian women, let's see, with 21% of Asian women and 23% of older Hispanic women. So the likelihood of living alone increases as you get older as well. And women, I believe, tend to outlive men. So older women outnumber older men. So it gives you those statistics. Living with chronic conditions, so chronic illness, that's a problem. You would think that would maybe push the older age range lower because people are sick, but we have some great medical advances and care standards of care that we as health professionals can promote, health promotion again. And so I think we're learning to manage those. And so we're living longer with those conditions. Living in poverty, living in institutions, skilled nursing facilities, depression and suicide can be issues for older men and women. And then caring for loved ones. So 65% of older adults with long-term care needs rely exclusively on family and friends to provide assistance. Another 30% supplement family care with paid assistance. So that's a lot of support. And care by the family and friends can determine whether the person can remain at home. And I don't know, I think that's really tough. I've taken care of some elderly family members on my side and my husband's side, and it's tough. It is exhausting emotionally, physically, and expensive financially. The financial burden is just ridiculous. There should be more long-term healthcare insurance, I think. Women usually end up, because we live longer, end up taking care of our spouses, or excuse me, our parents in the family. And especially if you're a healthcare professional, doesn't everybody turn to you when they have a splinter or a problem? And so depending on, so being a healthcare provider as well, you might end up being the caregiver. And so I just thought, again, those were more statistics that you could look at if you haven't really thought about the elderly population. I think being in college, depending on the developmental stage where you are, I would think college students, like my youngest is 24, and I mean, he doesn't really think about the elderly. He's worried about his young adulthood right now. He watched me take care of my mother, his grandmother on his dad's side, and he's seen that, he knows about it, but that's not what he thinks about. And so I think to bring that into the light, about ways that we can promote a positive image about aging would be a good thing. And so living spaces, I put some articles here, some websites, how to choose a nursing home or other long-term care facility, because there are things, it's like daycare, right? Choosing a daycare for your kids, maybe, right? So, there's reports that you can look up that tell you how many complaints they have against them. You can look up how many falls the residents have had, what their staffing ratios are. You can look those up to see, and also talking to the person that's going into the facility. Have that talk ahead of time. Encourage people to have discussed that prior to that time. Go visit them. Like I visited daycares, I visited in-home daycare providers, and I think it's important to go visit some long-term care facilities. I did that for my mother, who said that she did not want to die in our house. But when I looked at the facilities, I just didn't think they were what she wanted, the kind of atmosphere that she wanted. So this article provides some different things to look at, to call and visit different facilities. You have to look at Medicare, what it will cover, Medicaid, and feel free to ask questions, right? Go with a list. Encourage your clients who are facing this part of life to write the questions down so that you come prepared with a list of questions that you can have answered. A place for mom. This is one that I see advertisements for all the time on TV, but it has fairly good ratings. So I just put it there in case anybody wants to take a look at that. It's geographical, so you can look up and see different places. There are retirement communities too. You could look through those. A lot of different places in Florida, Texas, Arizona is another places where people want to retire and lead active lives. So where elderly Americans live and where they're moving to. Now this is pre-COVID. So I tend to break articles and information into pre and post COVID because things changed. The world changed with COVID. However, they're where older Americans live. So like I just said, Florida and Arizona, right? That's where most people, because it's warm, the taxes aren't so bad. Americans over 70. This is a graphic that shows you the let's see, Amador County, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz. There we go. 7.5% over 70 years old. Let's see, Monterey County, 7.289% over 70 years old. Let's see if we look down in Florida, 25% over 70 years old. Or some of these places, there's Nevada, that's Mojave. That's kind of warm there, but 15%. There we go, 13, 15%. You kind of look all over the place. South Dakota has 18%. What is that one? Doesn't even have a statistic for that one. But I think it's interesting to see. And then now again, these are older statistics. I'd have to look up new ones, or you could look up new ones if you were interested. But in 2013, over 30% of all U.S. counties experienced a phenomenon known as natural decrease due to greater numbers of deaths than births. So one of the things that I'm hearing from my kids is they don't necessarily want to bring children into the way the world is right now, and so they're not planning on having children. I'm blessed with one granddaughter. I might have more have grandchildren at some point, but this shows those percentages. And then I think now, unfortunately, or fortunately, I think unfortunately, the way politics is working right now, that people are moving out of California. They're moving to Texas. They're moving to Florida, or people want to move to states that have a lower income tax or state sales tax. And so people are moving all over the place, different places than they would have maybe thought before. And this gives a statistic about baby boomers 2000 to 2010. Where did they move, and how did that work out for them? So it tells you that there was a population change in some place. Well, that's Alaska. Who wants to move to Alaska? Actually, I have a friend that I went to high school with that lives. Two friends that live in Alaska. And so this tells you how the population changed over those years. So I just thought these were different, interesting statistics. And then thinking about that, now that Gen X and millennials and actually the, Gen Alpha are now moving forward and aging, not Gen Alpha so much, but I'm Gen X, and then the millennials, what do we have? X, Y, Z, and alphas are starting to age. So how will that change the demographics of the country and the demographics of the elderly? So those are interesting things, I think, to think about. And then different types of senior living options. If you're older or somebody comes to you and wants to know about options of places to live, these are just a few different ideas for people looking for some place to live. You can age in place, you can stay where you are. There are places that are age restricted communities. Sometimes you have to be 55 years or older to live in these particular communities. There are communities that have maybe specific demographics, LGBTQ, or maybe widows, widowers, something like that. Assisted living, so someplace that if you need help with medications or some of your activities of daily living, your ADLs, instrumental ADLs like cooking and bathing, not the medical assistance, I'm sorry, that because those would be different, but the cooking, those cleaning, that kind of stuff, you can get help with that. Nursing homes help with, or long-term care facilities help with the medical care. Respite care, one of my friends actually cares for her father at home due to dementia that he has, but she will take him to Westland House, which is here in Monterey County as part of community hospital. And they will watch him for a couple days so that she could, if she wants to go on vacation or take a break, she and her mother from caring for her father, then they have respite care available. Memory care facilities, so for those suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, they are especially safe. They should all be safe. All the facilities should be safe, but there are special safety precautions. They're generally locked units, so the person can't get out of the unit and hurt themselves. And also the staff generally has specialized training in how to help care for people with dementia and how to de-escalate situations when they get out of hand. There's also hospice care. Let me check and just make sure. Yes. So hospice care, because I want to talk to you about palliative care as well. So hospice care, it's not a place, it's a type of care. And so there is, if you're in a nursing home, you might have a hospice nurse that comes to the nursing home. If you are in your own home, the hospice nurse will come, usually weekly visits, depending on how the person is doing, how much medication or information that you need, help that you need, or preparing for death. And so they say that it's a life-limiting illness. They say it's about 6 months, but you can renew. So when you get to 6 months and have not passed away, but you still have the disease process, they will do another intake, and the physician can sign it. And so then, that person can continue on with the hospice care, because generally speaking, it's a 6 months time frame, but that doesn't mean that the person might not need longer, have longer time to be on this earth. So I think that's a good thing. In fact, my mother was just getting ready to renew. She was at her 6 months renewal. She had just passed 6 months of being in hospice care, and when she passed. So leave it to her to get in right under that 6 months. There's also something called palliative care, which again is a type of care that can be provided in a long-term care facility or in home. It does not have a time frame assigned to it. It may or may not be someone with a life-limiting illness, but it deals more with coping with pain and comfort issues. And so I think that's really a great service, and to be distinct, to distinguish between hospice and palliative care. And then other choices, continuing care, retirement communities, um, which I thought that was a great idea because you could be like in the really active part. And then if your health deteriorates or as you get older, then you could move to sort of assisted living. But then they also maybe have a long-term care where they have medical care available. And you're still staying in the same area. You're just moving to a different care level in a different part of the property. Co-housing, two types of co-housing, general and senior only. I've not really had much experience with this, but that's, that's an option, and home sharing. So those are things, I guess, where you might rent out this. What's this example? A retired woman might rent out her spare bedroom to another senior to reduce expenses. So that's also kind of what I think of co-housing, but the home sharing is more from the person living there perspective. So that could be, you could move abroad. So sometimes people will move over to other countries. That might be kind of fun. But you have to make sure that your insurance works in the other country, or if you have perhaps dual citizenship, that might help as well. You know, lots of different ways of thinking about that, some different benefits, because it could be that the healthcare is, dare I say, better in other countries. So that might be a good route to go. I personally want to live on a cruise ship and travel around the world and just keep renewing my around the world trip. And that should be about the same as a mortgage payment. So that's my plan. And then it gives you things about, do your research, same thing about finding a long-term care facility. How are you going to decide what good living options are? Depending on where you live, you might be fairly limited in your options. So it's good to know where you are living or working as a healthcare provider, a healthcare professional, so that you can be able to say, oh, well, there's this place over here, or here is the Alliance on Aging, for example. I should put a link to Alliance on Aging. They're a local business that helps with referrals and services for the elderly here in Salinas. I think I will do that. And then we have the developmental theories. We'll come back to that in a minute. Cognitive changes, so Alzheimer's and dementia. I like Very Well Health as a source. I think it's a fairly reputable source. And so let's do Alzheimer's disease. Well, yeah, we could do Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. So dementia would be the overarching theme. And then Alzheimer's would be a type of that. There are different types of dementias. Lewy body, for example, frontal lobe dementia, for example. And there's different stages of Alzheimer's disease, understanding it. So there's all different information here that you can look up if you have questions about it. There's early, middle, and late stages where different things happen. There's a Lewy body dementia is what Robin Williams suffered from. You could have mild cognitive impairment. So just to understand that there are different types of dementia requiring some of the same care and some different care. But you want to try and be able to reorient the person as much as you can to reality. But the problem is that sometimes you're not going to be able to do that. So sometimes you just have to say, like I remember my grandmother thought I was, because she was stuck in a time frame before I was born, and so she thought I was my mom, so it'd be my aunt's daughter, so my cousin. She thought I was my cousin, and so I would just say, "Oh yeah, yeah," I still called her Nana because it'll be Nana, but I didn't argue. What purpose does that serve? You can reorient to her name, The date and time, clocks, things like that are good to reorient. And then, so that's Alzheimer's. And then dementia. This way you guys can look, whatever speaks to you that you want to learn about. If you want to look more at dementia, Alzheimer's, some of the other types of dementias, frontotemporal, Lewy body vascular, all different types. It refers to dementia refers to different disorders that affect the brain and affect cognition, memory, sometimes personality, depending on where the part of the brain that's being destroyed is, which part of the brain. And so this particular article looks at different causes, signs of dementia, things that you start to see deteriorating: memory, communication, judgment, problem solving. So y'all can take a look at that on your own time if that interests you. And just trying to reorient the person as much as you can, but not to the point of frustration for them. This I thought was an interesting article, which is why, of course, I added it here again from Very Well Health, using reality orientation in Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we used to use a type of reality orientation when veterans would come back from war, and we would try to reassimilate them into society and to reorient them to their surroundings and to be able to communicate with people like they did prior to going to war. And so this talks about being compassionate and using it appropriately, and it could also help people with Alzheimer's and other dementias. So I thought that was really good. So these are some of the things, using their name, current events, clocks and calendars, labels, signs, writing notes. There was a movie I was watching, Jules, about it's so funny. It's about an alien that comes crashes on Earth, and the person whose yard he crashes in has dementia. Doesn't want to admit it. Friends don't want to admit it, but you see all the little sticky notes. There's a commercial also that has all these little reminder sticky notes all over the place to help reorient person. And so using these techniques as well as medication can help the person better help their cognition somewhat. And there are specific medications like Aricept, or Namenda is another one. And they don't cure Alzheimer's or dementia specifically, but they are said to prolong the decline. So that, that's a good thing. Right. And so the article just goes on to talk about that. So I just thought, that's kind of interesting to be able to help people to reorient them. Sometimes people with dementia will become combative, and that's really difficult because you're trying to keep them safe as well as keeping yourself safe. And it can be quite challenging, and you don't always see it coming. You can be sitting having a perfectly calm conversation, and then all of a sudden there'll be some trigger, I guess, for better lack of a term, trigger, and the person with dementia just becomes very, very agitated and confused, and might even try to hit or kick, those types of things. So it's really it can be really challenging to care for people at home when they get this way. So nutrition, what are we going to do about nutrition for the older adult? So this is hopefully a PDF that will load for us. Yay! So My Plate for older adults. Still want to drink plenty of fluids, grains, dairy. It gives you all these the proportions of what you want. Grains, dairy, protein. So hopefully they can still exercise somewhat, or some walking would be good. Even doing activities, they'll have singers or bands come in so people can sing along, or they'll play cards or do painting or just have little fun activities, which is really good as well. So there's that particular My Plate graphic. And then this one actually takes you to the My Plate USDA My Plate for older adults. And so you can look here. It also has the other life stages available. and telling people to be active. Ooh, you can do My Plate on Alexa. Cool. And it's still vitamins, folic acid we need. So remember we talked about folic acid in pregnancy, right? In prenatal and pregnancy to help combat the neural tube defects like spina bifida. So older adults also suffer from low folic acid levels. So they often, different dose, but they are also maybe on folic acid supplements. And so y'all can take a look at that, different tips. So we've tried to hit on nutrition across the lifespan and continuing to do that. Basically a variety of foods, maybe smaller portions. I think some people might get a little more finicky with their appetite as they get older. What I find interesting is that in long-term care facilities, because when I teach in the nursing program, I teach one semester in OB and pediatrics, and the other semester I teach in long-term care for the clinicals. And so, long-term care facilities are okay. I would not want to work in one. I think it's a very difficult place to work. But in terms of nutrition, they have a menu. They will tell you this is what our menu for the month is. It's often repetitive every other week, something like that. They do try to have options available, but we had two Korean women who were roommates in one of the long-term care facilities. It doesn't serve Korean food. So sometimes that's difficult, especially for with cultural differences, to find something that the person will eat. We had another couple, it was a married couple, Hispanic, and they would eat some of the food, but they would also have their daughter bring in food from home, and it was very carb heavy. But then you kind of have to think, well, if you're in a long-term care facility, how old are you, first of all? 80s, 90s, 70s? What is your current health? How long are you thinking you're going to live? I mean, we want to try and be as healthy as possible, but am I going to insist that the person eat their carrots because that's what they need to do? I don't know. It's just something to kind of challenge your thinking there a little bit, see what you feel, how you feel about that. Immunizations for adults. We talked about immunizations for children on the schedule. We talked about in postpartum care, immunizations like Tdap or MMR, flu vaccines, COVID vaccines. So there are vaccines that are needed throughout life, and specifically for, we can look at the 50 to 64. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you. And the 65 years plus. So COVID, everybody gets COVID and flu now. RSV, if you're 60 or older, that's respiratory syncytial virus. For a healthy person, it's kind of like a cold, but it can kill children and elderly adults. We still get our Tdap. We don't need the chicken pox, but what we need is the varicella, sorry, but what we need is the shingles vaccine. That's one that we want to take, because if you had chicken pox, then the virus, the HSV virus, is in you, and so it can rear its ugly head at any point, and it's very, very painful. Pneumonia, the pneumococcal. And then the other thing that you have, so yeah, pneumococcal and shingles, those are the big ones, plus flu and COVID, and keeping up on your Tdap. So based on medical conditions, there are also for adults a specific immunization schedule. So it will tell you if you have, for example, we can look at the diabetes column here. And so we'll tell you C notes. So RSV, it's all C notes, but it will tell you what is the red. The red, you don't want to have a live virus. That's not necessarily a good thing. Those are seasonal. The RSV is seasonal. HPV, if you're not sexually active later on in life, then hopefully you got it earlier. But it says if indicated. So we don't want live viruses if you have HIV or you're immunocompromised, because your body can't fight those off if it's a live virus. And so I just thought that, yeah, so red is contraindicated. There's your key down at the bottom. Y'all can take a look at that. So if you have heart disease, diabetes, this can help you, and your physician should know this information. But you can also find it on that CDC vaccine app or at the CDC. These are taken from the CDC site. So if you nowadays, my expectation is never that you have it memorized because it changes every year. So you could pull this out and go over this with somebody that has diabetes or heart disease or kidney disease and see what might be recommended for them, what the recommended schedule might be. Okay, let me go back and make that normal sized. Yay. And then we went over that. So let's go back. We'll look at the developmental theories, and then we'll go and look at the PowerPoint. So we have looked, what do we want to do? We looked at Daniel Levinson for the middle adult, Eric Erickson. We are in, let's look at that real quickly. Because for middle adulthood, we talked about generativity versus stagnation. And then in the last age group, from the mid-60s to end of life, in the period of development known as late adulthood, which we've been talking about. And so ego integrity or integrity versus despair. So people in late adulthood reflect on their lives and feel either a sense of satisfaction or a sense of failure. People feel proud of their accomplishments, have integrity. They can look back and say, yep, I did well. Those that don't often focus on what could have been, what should I have done? And so then you're kind of depressed and have despair and sad, and which is too bad. So it's very similar to generativity versus stagnation, I think. But I feel like generativity, you're still looking at how to contribute. I still think in your mid-60s is not old anymore. Like I remember being young and thinking, oh my gosh, 50 is old. And then now that I'm past 50, I'm like, okay, 90 is old. So, depending on how active you are, I think you still can have generativity, make a difference and volunteer and do things. But it tends to be more looking back. What have I accomplished? Whereas I feel like generativity is looking forward and backward, or looking backward and forward. There is another stage that has been found. So Joan Erickson was Eric Erickson's wife. She worked a lot with him on these theories. And so they did, as they aged, which I think is really cool. So as he got older, they developed this ninth stage called immortality versus extinction. And so like very old age. So usually thought of as beginning at age 65 and ending with death. That's the old one. That's the integrity versus despair. And so, but what about being in your 80s, right? There's still people in their 80s that are very, very much alive and have a lot of things that they can accomplish. And so it just wasn't, the stages that they had just weren't quite enough. And so they looked at other people in their 80s and 90s. And so they created or found that there was this new stage. So I just always think this is great because we don't really talk about this stage, but I love to talk about this stage. And so in the ninth stage, they actually say that you almost relive all the other stages. And so there's mistrust and autonomy is being whittled away. It's kind of like in almost, I guess, going backwards? I don't know, but you relive them. So there's issues with trust, right? As you become older, depending on your cognitive ability, you may trust or you may not trust, or you're not sure who to trust. And then autonomy, everybody wants to do something for you. I was always raised to help people, but older people don't necessarily want my help. So I have to be very careful on how I suggest or ask to help. We want them to be as independent as possible, which sounds like toddlers. And so they might want things a certain way. They might say no a lot. And so I just thought that was really interesting. And you lose your sense of place or the role that you have. So there's your role identity. And so what's I think important is that the difference between the ninth and the eighth stage is the ninth stage, the elders no longer has the what do they call it? The luxury of retrospective despair over their life. They're likely to be more involved with what body part will stop working that day. A lot of their friends are dying. So what friend may have died or passed away, which can set them up for despair. But at this stage, it's actually not as bleak. It's actually, I think, bleaker in the eighth stage, because if you can get past that age and you're into your 80s and 90s, and you can get past that despair, they call it gerotranscendence, right? So it's a stage at which the elder person is peacefully ready to move on to the next stage of existence, which would be being okay with where you are and knowing that death is coming, which would be extinction. So gerotranscendence is the term for that. And so I just wanted you to learn about that, because I always think that's quite interesting, and I don't think that particular stage gets enough credit. And if we're living longer, we need to be looking at that stage. Looking at Kohlberg, right? We are in the post-conventional morality. So we've been looking at this diagram through early, middle, and now late adulthood. And it has been said that many people only get to stage 4, but there are some that a percentage of the population that gets to stage 5 and even stage 6. So stage 5 is the social contract stage, where behavior is driven by balance of social order plus individual rights. So there's an individual right. The person has a right to do this, but society says we have to do this. So where is that? What does that mean? So we're trying to balance that. Our behavior then is to balance that. I think an example of that might be abortion rights, for example. So what is my right as an individual versus what is the social order say, or the laws say? Politics might be that. I think homelessness or hunger, violence, a lot of those types of things. And that then also then leads you to stage 6, which is universal ethics, and behavior is driven by internal moral principles. So what is it internally, your moral principles, your ethics and morals? That's how you're how you lead your life. And I think I mentioned earlier that I think the younger generations will achieve stages 5 and 6 more readily than say baby boomers, Gen X. I don't know. I feel like I'm growing. I think a lot of us probably will get to 5 and maybe 6. But like the older generations, things were very cut and dry. You did this, you did this, you did this. Unless you were really bad, and then you know, like criminals, then you didn't listen to any of it because you had no morals. Um, Thinking of like Al Capone, that kind of thing. All right, so let us look. We've looked at Havighurst, so let's briefly look at Havighurst to re-look at all the way down at the bottom. We did early, we did middle. There's later maturity. So some developmental tasks of later maturity, he qualifies them as age 61 and above. So adjusting to decreasing physical strength and health. So at 60, I don't think necessarily that's happening, but it could be, because again, people are living longer, but things don't start to work as well as they used to. Establishing explicit affiliation with one's age group. So bonding with people that are in your age group that are in the 60s, you have things in common. So almost kind of like teenagers again, like your peer group becomes very, very important. And then establishing a satisfactory physical living arrangement, which is why we talked about the different living arrangements that the elderly may have available to them. So those are some of those developmental tasks according to Havighurst. But what I think is interesting and what I like to look at is Robert Peck and then Robert Atchley, who has stages of retirement. So let's take a look at Mr. Atchley and his stages of retirement. So at some point, hopefully, we'll be able to retire. 65 is the general age of retirement, but many people are working into their 70s now, mostly because they have to. But there may be like a pre-retirement where you kind of know that retirement's coming before you're actually retired. So there's like remote, like it's way far away, retirement's far off, but it's going to happen. But people don't necessarily plan for it, but you probably should plan for it. And then the near phase of pre-retirement is with retirement, what they call looming, like it's coming, like you know it's coming. So maybe you're, I don't know, in your 60s at that point, or 64 or 65, and trying to decide based on your company, that kind of thing. And so you're still kind of positive about it. It's like, yeah, this is going to happen. Um, so depending on how you are going to handle that, right? So it says two important things happen. So older workers may get ready for separation from their jobs and prepare for the social situation, right? There might be subtle differences in how people view them. So if you think about somebody that, if you've ever worked in a place where you know somebody's leaving, not to retire necessarily, but to take another job, or they're leaving that particular job, something called, I call it short timers syndrome. Like their behavior kind of changes, and you're like, oh, I know they're leaving. You can see they're not as engaged with work as they have been in the past. And so when somebody's getting ready to retire, or somebody's maybe turned 65 even, sometimes the people, this could be ageism, will say, oh, they're 65, they need to retire. Oh, are they retiring? They might start treating them a little bit differently. And then you start to think about, well, what's going to happen when I retire? Am I going to spend time with my spouse, my partner? Am I going to be able to go on vacation? Am I going to, what am I going to do? What am I going to enjoy? And you start thinking and fantasizing about it. That's pre-retirement. And the honeymoon phase is exactly like what it is. I am retired. Hallelujah. Yes, I have time to myself. I could do what I want. Everything's like hunky dory. This is great. A lot of times people will travel, do some things that they haven't ever done before, because it's like so exciting, and budding relationship with your spouse again, and that kind of thing. And so then after that, you're going to sort of settle into a routine, and that routine will sort of stabilize. And if you had full people who had full off the job lives are able to establish such a routine easily, because you didn't just live to work. So apparently I'm going to have to struggle with that when I get to that age. Sorry, everything's falling off my desk. Um, so we'll see about that. But there's rest and relaxation. Right, we did this activity, and then we have this rest and relaxation. Um, excuse me, there's not a lot of activity, because it's like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out and drink my margaritas and mai tais outside on my porch, and do all that kind of thing. But then sometimes you feel like, well, then I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm just kind of sitting around. And so if you were doing the ego integrity despair phase, maybe there's not so much ego integrity going on there. And so you're kind of not sure. Well, I don't know. What do I think? What do I want to keep doing with my life? And so then some people might have what's called a disenchantment phase. So they have a hard time adjusting to retirement. So the honeymoon's over. Some will fit into this great rest and relaxation, but other ones will kind of feel like let down. Like, I thought this was going to be really great, and now I really don't feel like I have a sense of purpose. And for different reasons, actually list some reasons there: poor health, little money, not a lot of alternatives. And so you kind of have to reorient. Like, you have to kind of get it together again after you realize that. And what do I want to do? Maybe I want to move someplace or experience a different community. Um, like, I have to make it my own kind of thing. I can't really depend on other people to do it for me. I had to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so when you have that sort of letdown, and then you go through that sort of growth phase, like, oh, I need to kind of get it together. That's called a reorientation. So I'm looking at other ways that I can be involved or volunteer or hang out with my kids or my grandkids, or travel, or kind of reorienting myself to, okay, don't be so sorry, don't be sorry for yourself, kind of pull out of it. And so then you get into a retirement routine. So in that phase, there's a good criteria to make choices. You can deal with life in reasonably comfortable way. You kind of know what to expect. So maybe you're not just going to lounge around all day drinking your margaritas in the sun, but you're going to do that a couple times, and then you're going to go, Fridays is going to be movie day, and Thursday is going to be golf day, and Wednesday is going to be date night. And you get into this routine, and it's pretty predictable and satisfying, and I'm good. I can handle retirement. I got it. I got it now. This is good. And then the termination phase. So many people will die during the retirement routine phase. Everything becomes quite routine and satisfying, and you're happy. But others may develop illness or disability. And so then they're kind of like, they'll be sick and disabled, not really in a retirement. And then there's increasing dependence. And so the loss of retirement role happens gradually. Other ways of losing the retirement role are going back to work, is going back to work. So some people will actually go back to work or volunteer like on a full-time basis. Or you might, in a negative way, unfortunately, lose all your money, lose your, spend all your finances and become dependent on somebody else. So there are different ways to reach the termination of the retirement phase. Hopefully people get through that. But I think it's hard for people that have worked all their lives, or people that maybe have to continue working through their 70s just to make ends meet. And I would challenge you to think about, well, what about social determinants of health? How do those play into the retirement phase, the retirement age? What do you think about that? And so then if we go to, so that covers, we did Havighurst and we did stages of retirement. And so now we'll look at Robert Peck's developmental tasks of aging. So remember that Havighurst actually goes through all of the age groups. We just have sort of been focusing on the early, middle, and late adulthood stages of his theory. But Peck's theory talks about tasks of aging. And these are kind of weird words, but this is one of the theories. And so what Peck is saying is that the personality development in elderly people is occupied by these three, what he calls major developmental tasks or challenges. And so he says redefinition of self versus preoccupation with work role. So we just talked about stages of retirement, right? So I have to redefine myself. I can no longer be preoccupied with my work role, my work identity, because I am retired. So I have to redefine myself in my retirement stage. Who am I? What do I want to do? That going from that generativity and stagnation into the integrity despair stage, and then eventually maybe even into the more immortality versus extinction. So body transcendence versus body preoccupation would be another stage. So you have to learn to cope and move beyond the physical changes that are happening as a result of aging. So if you think about when you read through the chapters that the vision changes, the hearing changes, your weight might change, taste might change, your energy levels might change, other body parts might or might not work. And so I have to figure out, I'm losing teeth or I need dentures. And so being able to cope with that and move beyond that, I think is really difficult. I feel like my husband's going through that one right now. And these can all happen at the same time. Maybe not the ego transcendence versus ego preoccupation, but those first two could happen simultaneously. And so instead of moving from being so preoccupied with the body that you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm getting older. Yes, I need a hearing aid. Yes, I need dentures. Let me get those things. Okay, cool. Now I can keep going. And then that last stage would be the ego transcendence versus ego preoccupation. So where the elderly have to come to grips with their coming death, which takes you back to those other the other stages that we were looking at in terms of Erik Erikson, right? That has to do with that. So these are just different theories that we don't always hear about. And so I do like to introduce those. So it gives you another way to think about the elderly. And so let's go back and look at I'm just going to download it and look at the PowerPoint, which should pretty much be a recap of what we've just talked about, but I want to make sure that I don't miss anything specific here. So enable content. There we go. Let's move that out of the way a little bit here. I'm sorry, late adulthood, right? So pictures of there's hanging out on the beach and being together with people. I think they're playing bingo. That looks like a bingo wheel to me, hanging out with grandkids. So the objectives, and then looking at the different age groups. So we talked about being over 65, and then we also talked about the very old in that ninth stage. So 80s, it says 90 or older, but 80s, 85 and above. And that population, as we said, is growing. Those baby boomers are old now. So different health problems, these are things that you could potentially talk about in your health promotion project. Osteoporosis, falls and fractures, cataracts, vision, hearing things, flu, pneumonia, other illnesses that might be apparent. Because your immune system is also breaking down. So you're not necessarily, it's not as easy to fight off those diseases or infections or viruses. What about your income, right? Social Security or pensions, hopefully. But if they do away with Social Security, which they've been talking about for years, I don't know. Medicare only covers certain things. So you can actually have Medicare and Medicaid, which might be a good idea. This just runs you through the history of Social Security and Medicare. So there's all these parts to Medicare. We talked about this, I believe it was week 2 when we talked about governmental influences, because this program's put out by the government. Nobody understands it. That's not true. Some people understand it. I think it's just confusing for people, and you have to pay. You don't have to pay for like Part A, but you have to pay for Part B. And you have to pay for Part D, and you for sure have to pay for the Medigap to cover what Medicare doesn't cover. So I kind of would like universal health care in that in that way, and not have to worry about health care. And so this is just more talking about Medicaid, Medicare. And so looking for the education level of the growing elderly population, what are their strengths and gifts and talents, so that we can kind of play to those and take advantage of those when we're educating them. Challenges, again, there come those social determinants of health, access to healthcare. What was their education level? What are their nutritional needs? Polypharmacy, so many different medications. And elder or dependent abuse. We talked about child abuse, but there's also elder abuse in terms of physical, emotional, financial is another thing, where the kids, grandkids, or other people will be taking money, and the older person doesn't even realize that that's happening. Psychosocial, so hopefully you're able to, like I said, there's all these physical problems, psychosocial not problems, but changes, and being able to adapt to those. There's your ego integrity. We talked about menopause and middle adulthood. Maybe there's that decreased income, grandparenting, although that I think may or may not come earlier, depending. And again, some do re-enter the job market. Like your Walmart greeters. I see people, elderly people there. Looking at autonomy, we discussed that, competence with cognitive changes, and belonging, right? And so I want to belong. That's I think an inherent thing that we all have at whatever age or stage we're at, is we want to belong. And with ageism or not valuing our elderly, that can be a problem. So grandparenting, I think, is a great thing. I love my granddaughter. I think grandparents love their kids. They think of it sometimes as a second chance to do better with the grandchild than they did with the child. That's not how I feel about it, but a lot of people do feel that way. I just try to enjoy my granddaughter. And so the grandparent may need the care of the parent as they become older as well. We talked about that sandwich generation. So postmenopausal, we talked again about menopause and middle adulthood a little bit, but for sure, if you haven't experienced it in middle adulthood, it could be coming a little bit later. But that postmenopausal can be up to a year, sometimes longer, after cessation of the period. And so there's still a lot of symptoms that the woman can feel. So driving, I think I mentioned this in middle adulthood. Like, when do you take the keys away from dad or grandpa? there can be undetected impairments. We don't know if they're physically able to move, the reaction time, right, to be able to accomplish defensive driving and make these decisions, safe decisions in a quick amount of time. They may not qualify to have their driver's license renewed. We may have to teach them how to take the bus or another alternative type of transportation. Um, uh, yeah, I'm speeding because I have to get to where I'm going before I forget where I'm going, or because I need to get to the bathroom. um, Health promotion, keep having those dental eye checkups, the vision checkups, blood pressure, pap smears and mammograms are still important. Bone mass, that's a new one. As the bone density can decrease, you want to get that checked to see if you're at risk for falls and breaking bones. I mean, there could be some substance abuse, the over medication with the polypharmacy, where you're taking one medication, but it makes you nauseous. And so you take another medication to make you not feel nauseous, but then that makes you have to go to the bathroom. So then you take a medication to stop you from peeing, which then increases your blood pressure. And so you're just on all these medications that are sort of counterintuitive to each other. Sexual dysfunction, urinary incontinence are big issues for this age group as well. Like I know where every bathroom is everywhere I go. And there are medications for incontinence as well as sexual dysfunction. Just make sure that you're letting people know the side effects that can be felt as a result of using those medications. Nutrition, sometimes now we need to move to liquid supplements. If the older person doesn't have great teeth, if they can't get dentures, they might need liquid supplements, or maybe even enteral feedings. They might end up with like a tube in their nose, nasogastric tube, or a gastrostomy tube, because they can't swallow. Maybe their swallowing has decreased, dysphagia. They can't like feel the food. They can't swallow, things like that, and so they might need other ways and other types of food to eat to keep their nutrition. So you could see weight loss. You'll see poor skin healing, muscle wasting, and then we want to make sure, hopefully, that we can keep their fluids up. And that's really hard because they forget to drink something, even if you put the glass there in front of them. So you have to constantly remind or help them to drink. Memory loss, we talked about dementia and Alzheimer's. Yep, we talked about that. And then, so spiritual needs, moral beliefs, we talked about, I know, it's okay. We talked about Kohlberg. Sometimes people want to, or they find religion again. You're okay. I know, it's okay. All right, I am going to stop the recording here for a minute. Okay, let's get this finished. So sorry. So we've gone over Kohlberg's moral beliefs, and then one of the other things that happens in late adulthood is sometimes the person will find meaning in life in terms of spiritual needs, faith and spiritual needs. So they may end up going back to going to church or synagogue or wherever their faith leads them. Okay, sexuality. I love that one. More and more seniors are getting it on, but notice that there is protection there because seniors are still at risk for sexually transmitted diseases and infections. And so pregnancy isn't an issue. And a lot of times the older person will think about that, but not realize that there could be a sexually transmitted infection, or they may not know that they have one and be transmitting it. There can also be erectile dysfunction. There can be, once the woman has gone through menopause, there can be painful intercourse, dyspareunia, and not having that special person can be an issue as well. So emotions, disengagement, going back to the developmental stages. And so hopefully there are things that can keep the person active and engaged, learning, doing things. And then in terms of depression, if they don't have things that are as engaging, then they might suffer from depression. I see that a lot in our clients that are in long-term care facilities. And that can also lead to having a negative attitude and being combative and angry and all those things. It can also lead to physical illness and poor health. And it sort of becomes its own little cycle of I feel depression, I'm not going to do anything, even though there are activities and people are encouraging them to participate in those activities. They just want to stay in bed and not interact with anybody, which is not a good thing. So they love when nursing students come to talk to them. That they enjoy because the students will sit with them and talk to them for quite a while. So clinical disease, hopefully people are in good health and they're active still, which is great. And there are things that will happen that we've talked about in terms of like menopause and then high lipids and hypertension and heart failure, things like that, bone disease. But hopefully if screenings are happening and they are seeing a primary care physician, then those things can be addressed and help them to lead a healthy life. You can modify exercise programs. So this is an example of an easy seated workout. So there's different ways to do exercise without not necessarily having to do 60 minutes of aerobic exercise. So lots of videos out I've seen on YouTube and different other social medias that talk about sitting and exercise, and like they do different dances for exercise. So a lot of options out there. Safety. So because of the neurosensory changes, the vision, the hearing, the bone density, being able to not move as well as you used to be able to. And so it's difficult to see the path that you're walking on sometimes, or you might have balance issues. You could have vertigo from having inner ear disorders. There could be fear from being alone or not wanting to ask for help. Sometimes there can also be, we talked about elder abuse in terms of physical, emotional abuse going on. So walkers are helpful, canes, other devices, other like magnifiers to help with reading, things like, signing checks, although not many people write checks anymore, but, or being able to see the ATM machine, things like that. So it's nice to have like a magnifier, portable magnifier that you can take with, or hearing aids, things like that. So to be aware of the safety things. And then physical activity, kind of talked about that already. And then let's see, so exercise can significantly slow, right? We know the metabolic rate generally decreases with age, but you have all kinds of different exercises that you could potentially do. And hopefully where you are living, if it's in like an assisted living facility, they have scheduled classes, or maybe you could join one or do one of those, the video classes, something like that. Sleep and rest, so need lots of sleep still, more rest. Naps again are really good. The sleep quality deteriorates. There's a lot of insomnia that I see. And also, remember we talked about in adolescence about the time frame of sleep, and in adolescence, it's more that they're awake at night instead of during the day. So it's kind of the same thing. The elderly person tends to go to sleep much earlier in the evening, like maybe 7, but they'll wake up at like 4 in the morning. And so their whole time has shifted. It's kind of backwards from what it was in the circadian rhythm, what it was in adolescence, where they would sleep all day. And so you might see that. So any keeping people warm, making sure they exercise, toileting, no stimulants before bedtime. Maybe those things can help. Walking, gardening, hobbies become important. So they're doing looks like fencing here. She's got her walker there. They're still, or sword fighting or fencing or whatever. And it keeps the mind active. It keeps the body active. So any little hobbies, exercises that you can do are great. Different services available. We kind of talked about these in terms of the demographics and where elderly can can live. Mental health care is still important. Daycare, they have adult daycare centers. There's one around here somewhere, and I can't remember. I have to look up and see if I can find it, and add it to the lesson page. But respite care, senior centers, any different kinds of activities that are available. Alliance on Aging has activities and classes for seniors as well. I will go ahead and post that link as well. And then different rates, different things that we talk about as that older person gets closer to dying. There hopefully is some preparation. It's really difficult to talk about those things. The Patient Self-Determination Act from 1990 was really a big milestone in terms of not just the elderly, but patients in general, that they can tell you their own wishes. And so they have something called Do Not Resuscitate, a DNR. And if a person has chosen that they don't want any extensive resuscitation, if they should fall into cardiac arrest, that usually is posted somewhere in the house. That it should be visible so that if the paramedics would need to come or the ambulance comes, they would know not to do resuscitation. There are actually different levels of do not resuscitate orders, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of this class. But there's comfort measures and maybe not having the enteral feedings. There's different levels of that, but definitely it needs to be posted so anybody coming into the house understands what they should or should not do. The same thing's true in long-term care facility. I find that frustrating because I don't know the clients all that well. And I always tell the students, look up in their chart what their code status is, because it's not posted on their door and they don't have it on an ID bracelet, which most of them unfortunately don't wear anyway. And so if you walk in the room and the person's unresponsive, you're going to call for help and start resuscitation, but somebody needs to look up the code status for that particular person. You also have, you can designate a healthcare proxy or a durable power of attorney for healthcare, so that if you are unable to make healthcare decisions, you have somebody else that you have designated that is able to make those healthcare decisions. Hopefully you've talked extensively to that person so they know how to advocate for you and protect you, and do what you'd like. And there's also something called a living will, where it outlines, like the person would hopefully write it, they should write it before they have any cognitive decline, but it outlines future treatment, what they would or would not like to have happen. And so those are important documents, important things to know about a person. This is actually the form. It's called a PULSE, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It has to be signed by the doctor and the patient, and gives guidance for resuscitation. So they have full, or there's selective treatment, comfort care. Do they want nutrition? And the person can change their mind about resuscitation at any point in time, which again is sort of a scary thing. But hopefully we're doing what the person wants. And then as far as teaching techniques, so in terms of teaching techniques, we can still be able to teach the elderly different things. A lot of times they'd like to learn new things. Computers are a big thing, any new technologies that come out. They like to listen to music. So if we have Alexa or can show them something like that. But they need to be motivated. They want to learn. If they don't want to, then they're not going to. And so we have to make it relevant to them, and have respect between the teacher and the learner. And sometimes we might have to be creative about how we do the education, because it may take a little bit longer for them to totally hold on to the information that we're giving them. So even if you're talking about their healthcare, things to do, safety things, they may forget what you are telling them. And so you may need to repeat or find other ways to remind them. And I believe that is the last one. Yep, things that you need to know that you don't need to know for this particular version of this class. So I will go ahead and stop sharing that. And so that would conclude our, oh, nope, I know I wanted one more thing to show you. Hold on. Let me close that. And let me look at the reading. I just wanted to show you for that advanced old age and geriatrics that so some of the key points of the old age, late old age. And so there are actually Healthy People 2030 goals, like we talked about in the beginning of the class, that are specific to the elderly. And so you can always look those up. People are living longer. We've talked about that. Oh, theories of aging process. That was one of the things to look at in terms of cellular changes with cells. So I would know the free radicals and the biological clock and the wear and tear theory, just different ideas of why people age, immune theory. So take a look at those. Then the chapter goes into different physiological changes. We've talked a little bit about those, but how digestion and taste and smell change, vision and the hearing. And so the teaching tip would be to have the person repeat what they thought they heard, and then you can hopefully have a conversation about that if they did or didn't remember what you had told them. We talked about sexuality, health promotion. And so this goes a little more in depth according to the World Health Organization. The elements of sexual health when viewed holistically, because we want to look at the whole person. So well-being, fulfillment, relevance, diversity, and then the sexual health is influenced by gender norms, roles, expectations, power dynamics. And so here's just, these didn't end up actually being boxes the way that I copied it. So I apologize, but it'll say box, but then it's not really a box. But those are things to take into account when talking with someone about their sexual health, an elderly person about their sexual health. And what else? Patients, psychological changes, looking at cultural considerations. There is specific, they call it geropsychology, which is specific to the aging, the older adult, the aging population. I think we're going to talk about this in week 8. Loss and grief, bereavement is a big part of late adulthood, even potentially middle adulthood or the end of middle adulthood, where people start to either health declines or the person dies. And so that's really difficult. And so here's a gentleman helping his granddaughter with a project there. And dementia is something, again, that we talked about with Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia, but it might be difficult to see that it's happening. And depending on the family or the work situation, it may be able to sort of be covered over. So I think it's a good idea if you think that there are issues to kind of investigate a little or suggest perhaps a primary care physician visit would be good. Ego integrity, we talked about that. And also the immortality versus extinction. We talked about the developmental tasks, and also about immortality versus extinction for the very elderly person and late adulthood, and finding some ways to just stay on top of it, like hobbies, activities. Hopefully you're able to do that. Hopefully the person is able to find a living situation that supports that. And we've gone through these things: exercise, nutrition, mental health. We did talk a little bit, we touched on elder abuse, polypharmacy, and the placement alternatives. I gave you some resources on different places that the elderly can live, different options that they have, and the nursing homes, different activities of daily living with which they might need help. and different concerns. So again, when you're looking at a place for the elderly person to live, who's going to be controlling the finances? Is there personal space? Are there any special needs? Is it a private room, which costs a whole lot more than a shared room? Are they allowed to bring pets with them, pets or plants? What kind of activities do they have? Things like that. Those would be things to look at. And then here is some newer information in terms of the role of the healthcare worker. Right. So we as healthcare professionals in our different capacities will maybe be working with geriatric population someday with an older person. And so being able to understand all the physical decline, the self-concept changing, the different aspects of aging, I think is really important. I personally think that nursing and healthcare in general provides a wide array of things, of opportunities for you, for us. You can start out as, a physical therapist, and then maybe you don't kind of like that. And so maybe you go into nursing, or maybe you go into education, or you may be a nurse on a medical surgical floor in a hospital, and then decide, wow, I really love working with adults. So I want to go work over in this long-term care facility and make a difference over there. So I feel like there's opportunities to really speak to our strengths as healthcare professionals. And so for this particular example, understanding the developmental tasks and things that happen to the elderly as the person is aging, I think is really important. And one of the key things is for us to help them maintain their autonomy as much as possible. And so this person apparently just celebrated her 100th birthday, and we're seeing more and more of that. People are living longer. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind are the principles of elder care. And so I told us somewhere that there it is. So when we talk about caring for the elderly, we understand their developmental tasks and all those things, but what are ways that we can help them maintain their autonomy or help them to thrive as an elderly person? And so if you look at the principles of elder care, to encourage confidence in the person, help raise their self-image, provide them hopefully with some sense of empowerment where they can make their own decisions, demonstrate a kind and caring manner, identify and include family and social support systems as much as possible. So there are times when the family's very involved, and there are times when the family's not so very involved. It just depends. But I think the kindness, I think the active listening, going back to therapeutic communication that you learned earlier in the class, including culture, spirituality, hope, and faith, again, are ways to help and care for the elderly. And then exercise, nutrition, follow up on health concerns. And I think assist in setting personal goals is part of empowerment and raising the self-image and encouraging confidence. So maybe you can set a small goal, especially if the person is depressed or not doing things that they normally did. Try not to promise things you can't commit to, but I've had students that have played card games, read books, done coloring books, all kinds of, done nails. Oh, doing their nails is for the women residents, just boost their self-esteem so much. So trying to think of some of those out of the box things as a healthcare professional that you might be able to do to help achieve an increase in self-image and feeling of empowerment, I think would be really important for them. And then this just has key points for this particular chapter. So it is basically a review of what we talked about sort of succinctly, which is nice, but I also wanted to touch on the principles of elder care because you will see that again. And in terms of the teaching, it goes a little more in depth into the sexual health. So we are good there. All right, so I will stop sharing. And again, my apologies for having to stop and start the recording a couple times. And hopefully you have a new or deeper appreciation for the elderly population. And we will move on in week 8 to loss, grief, and bereavement. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and a great week coming up, and I will be in touch. All right. Thank you so much.